Africa. My name is Nazli Sharif, and today we are coming to you live from the DA's Gauteng headquarters for the Misery Index press briefing. What is a misery index? Well, in just a couple of moments, we will be chatting to Dr. Dion George, who will outline exactly what this misery index is. But in brief, the misery index is a report that reflects the catastrophic decline in the economic conditions in South Africa. The fact of the matter is, our economy has been at a standstill for nearly a decade and a half, and South Africans are getting poorer by the day. The cost of food, fuel, and electricity has soared, and rolling blackouts has brought production lines to a halt, deepening the sense of hopelessness. This way, a DA government has workable solutions and can promise South Africa a workable alternative. Today we will be hearing from DA experts, which includes the DA Shadow Minister of Finance, Dr. Dion George, the DA Shadow Minister of Social Development, Bridget Masango, and the DA's Deputy Shadow Minister in Finance, Ashor Sarupen. The DA has a clear plan to get our economy stronger and to create jobs. Please like and share this broadcast with all of your friends and your family, and please join the conversation online using the hashtag Rescue South Africa and hashtag VoteDA. We are definitely keen to hear from you and hear your thoughts on what this misery index actually means for you and what it means for everyday South Africans. Please don't go anywhere. Like I said, when we come back, we will be chatting to Dr. Dion George, so make sure you don't go anywhere.
In this election, for the first time in 30 years, the ANC will lose its majority, but they will do anything to stay in power. Imagine a coalition between the ANC, the violent EFF, and the Zuma faction. Under this coalition of corruption, life will only get worse. This election is about survival. Unite to rescue South Africa. Vote DA.
Hello, Dion. Today we are here to discuss the misery index. Now, I don't really know what it is. Can you explain to us in brief what it is and what it means?
Well, the misery index was originally designed in the 1980s and has been used by a number of countries to measure their economic progress. Now, originally the index included unemployment and inflation, but what we've done is we've added additional components to it. We've added debt to GDP, we have added per capita GDP per capita, we have added the repo rate, we've added the exchange rate between the rand and the dollar, we've also added the fuel price and the electricity price. And what we've done then is we've created a composite misery index which indicates what is happening to our economy. And what is very clear is over the past 15 years, we've had a very steady deterioration in all of those components, which basically is a reflection of what we have seen from our government. The ANC government has mismanaged our economy to the extent that people are battling so much, and that's actually showing up in the index. So when we launch it later, you'll see very clearly that there's a red, very thick red line that runs right across the index and indicates how poorly our economy is faring.
Yeah. Dion, with using real-life examples, can you tell us what the index says about how people experience life and living in South Africa?
Well, as a whole, the index indicates the suffering that South Africans are under at the moment. For example, if you look at inflation, we've had a never-ending inflation pressure on our economy, and that is the result of government mismanaging the economy. For example, if you look, for example, at the fuel price, if the fuel price was lower, and that's an administrated price, if the fuel price was lower, and the government could do that very easily, it would make fuel cheaper, it would make food cheaper, and would also make it easier for households to feed their families. We know how households are battling to pay their debts, to feed their families, and that millions of children in South Africa are starving. And that shows up on the index. So it's not something that the DA has made up. This is a scientific measurement that shows just how badly things have gone over the past 15 years.
Yeah, and badly it is. Dion, can you tell us what are some of the main issues that is causing our economy to cripple as badly as it is?
Well, as I mentioned before, the ANC has made the wrong policy choices. What they have done is they've placed government in the wrong place in our economy. So what the ANC government believes is that it can somehow grow the economy by throwing huge amounts of money at the state-owned enterprises, but they've never generated any jobs, they will never make any profits, they will never take us forward. What the DA believes is that we need to restructure our economy. So we need to place government in the right place. Also, the ANC has made friends with the wrong people. So what's happened to sentiment in South Africa? Investors have left the country. R1 trillion has left our economy in investments over the past decade, but we can get it back. And that's the exciting thing about this. This misery index, yes, it shows very bad things, but what it also indicates is that we can turn it the other way around if we make good choices. And that is possible if people vote the right way next week.
Yeah. Dion, that's exactly what I wanted to ask you next is when we look at the misery index and we see the amount of people suffering, can they be rescued? And what are some of the DA solutions to rescue South Africa?
Well, absolutely, yes. We're very excited about the prospects that we can rescue our economy. Everybody will know that we do our alternative budget every year. We also have recently launched our economic policy, and in that policy it sets out what we will do with industrial policy, with trade policy, with fiscal policy. These things are possible. We can make South Africa really, really good. We can make it so that every South African will be able to become everything that they're capable of becoming. And where that starts is government making the right choices. But then, of course, you need to have the right government in place. So the DA is ready. We have a rescue package. We have already launched the economic policy, as I mentioned. We are ready to roll it out. Come Wednesday, come us winning government, we will be able to do this. And we're very excited about the prospects of being able to do exactly that.
Absolutely, Dion. We were chatting this morning before we went live that Election Day is just a couple of days away. How are you feeling?
I'm very excited. I mean, obviously, we know the DA works very hard. I mean, this has been over 2 years now that we've been preparing. Of course, we've been doing fundraising. That's going very well. We are ready. We're ready financially. We're ready operationally. Now it's just to get out the vote. And that is so incredibly exciting. I can feel it. I mean, actually, quite frankly, I woke up this morning, I thought, I'm getting more and more excited as we get closer and closer to the day. So I can't wait for Wednesday. Actually, it starts on Monday, but I cannot wait because we're going to see a really good thing happening there when South Africans basically say, we've had enough of this broken government, we want a better one, and that's the DA.
Dion, coming up in the broadcast, you will be briefing the media on the findings of the misery index. But before I let you go, can you please give your final message to everybody at home?
Please go out and vote. The most important thing now is to tell the government we're tired of the broken. We don't want to have misery. We want to have upliftment. We want to be able to have a situation where everybody in this country can become everything that they are capable of becoming. We can do that. We are, in fact, a rich country. And the only reason why we're on our knees is because our government is broken and we can fix it. So please, go and vote DA.
There you have it. Go and vote DA. I just want to remind everybody at home that when you go and vote, you will be getting 3 ballot papers. You'll be getting your national ballot paper, your regional ballot paper, and your provincial ballot paper. And it is imperative that you put your X next to the DA on all 3 ballot papers. Don't forget. Tell everybody you know, anybody who might ask, tell them to put their X next to the DA on all 3 ballot boxes. When we come back, we will be having a chat to the DA Shadow Minister of Social Development, Bridget Masango. So make sure you don't go anywhere.
For the first time in 30 years, the ANC government will lose its majority.
Opposition parties have united as the multi-party charter for South Africa.
A strong democratic alliance with a proven track record
can anchor a new government that serves the people.
But a new government that works is only possible if you vote for it. Let's unite and rescue South Africa. Vote DA.
Welcome back to the media briefing on the Misery Index. I am now with the DA Shadow Minister of Social Development, Bridget Masango. Hello, Ma'am Bridget. It's lovely to have you here. Ma'am B, we just heard Dion briefly explain what the Misery Index is. But can you just explain in your own words what exactly it is for everybody at home?
Well, Naz, the Misery Index is actually putting into a more starker picture what the impact of the ANC's failures have been to an ordinary South African. It captures in one index or in one sort of way how the old age, the ages or the decades of mismanagement of finances, how they have translated to South Africans actually being so poor that some of them cannot even feed their families. It has made it so difficult for the young people to find employment because businesses have closed. And all this has been done by just the mismanagement of funding of tax monies by the ANC government. And this index is actually putting that picture so clearly for everyone to understand how did we get here.
Yeah. Ma'am Bridget, why was it so important for the DA to have a press briefing and not just release a statement on the findings of the Misery Index?
It is important, Naz, that South Africans know the origins of the index. It is also important for them to see how many elements of the index are there and also how those elements can actually be applicable to the situation in South Africa and how it has brought South Africa on its knees when it comes to poverty, when it comes to people not having food to eat, when it comes to all sorts of unemployment and all the hardships that real South Africans on a day-to-day basis are facing. So you wouldn't be able to put that on a statement. You need to actually piece it out piece by piece on how the index works and how it is such a true picture of what we are experiencing as South Africans. And of course, it will make people actually make up their minds, apply their minds on the basis of this index, who they actually get to vote for as their coming government.
Ma'am Bridget, we speak about the DA as saying we are not a party of promises, we are a party of policies. Can you speak a little bit on some of the solutions that we have to assist those suffering the most in South Africa?
Yes, we don't point out problems and just leave them there as the Democratic Alliance. For example, we have a social development policy that has made sure that each and every aspect of the problems that people are facing now at a social level, there is a solution for that. Be it grants, be it the older persons, be it the orphans and vulnerable children, be it shelters for people who are homeless. We have a solution for each and every one of those. And our social development policy is linked to all our other policies because this is how we work as the party, so that you know what comes together to actually bring about a solution like that. So we don't just say, here is a problem, here is the person that's wrong, but we also say how it can be solved. So it's not all doom and gloom. South Africans can expect solutions to the problems and the hardships that they are facing at the moment.
Ma'am Bridget, I know you will also be addressing the media for the press briefing, so I don't want to keep you for too long, but can you please give your final message to the viewers at home?
South Africans, like anything else, the Democratic Alliance does not come up with problems and leave you there. There you are. This index is going to help you to apply your mind about how we are where we are, why we are where we are, and how we can go on in a more positive way. We also have everything being sorted and everything ready to start governing this country for the South Africans, not for ourselves as the leaders of this party. And also we know that some of you may still want to say, who can I vote for in national and who can I vote for in regional, whatever. We are saying all the ballots, DA, for a future that is prosperous.
Absolutely. And when we come back, we will go straight to the media briefing. So make sure you don't go anywhere. Again, like and share this broadcast. Let everybody know what we're talking about today. It's important to speak about the economy and how much we still need to do. And there's help on the way. Don't lose hope. So make sure you don't go anywhere. We'll be right back.
'94 was a great moment in our country's history. We were united, we had hope. We all shared the same dream of one South Africa for all. That dream has been hijacked, corrupted and sold out by the power-hungry and corrupt. They divide us with anger and hate. Corruption is killing our country. Those who have betrayed the struggle are the ones in power who have made themselves rich while the poor go hungry. This is not what we were promised. More empty promises, more unemployment. For 25 years, we have waited. We are moving backwards. The choice before us is simple. Either we make a change and move forward, or our dream dies. Only you have the power to bring change.
Good morning, all, and welcome to the Democratic Alliance's media conference on the Misery Index. The ANC, in its manifesto, they talk about the 30 glorious years since the party came to power. President Ramaphosa, on his campaign trail, has boasted about economic growth, yet 12 million South Africans are unemployed. 81% of households skip at least 1 meal a day, and 5 million children are currently starving. It is true that throughout the first decade and a half after South Africa's first democratic election, the government did move our economy in the right direction. Its initial focus on protecting individual liberties, steadily moving access to high-quality public education and dignified health care, developing a thorough safety net, that sought to support all citizens, enhancing community-focused policing and maintaining a strong defense force enabled it to execute its constitutional responsibilities relatively well. This initial drive fostered a remarkably stable market-based economy, which over a period of 15 years sustained an average growth rate of 3% a year, the final 4 of which saw growth hover at an astonishing 5%. It resulted in a near halving in unemployment and a doubling of GDP per capita. The relatively responsible management of the people's money stabilized South Africa's fiscal environment to the extent that our debt to GDP ratio was lowered to and stabilized around a healthy 27%. By 2007, we even achieved a primary fiscal surplus. The savings from reduced government interest expenses were used to fund the rollout of one of the most expansive social welfare programs in the developing world. Then came the infamous 207 ANC conference, which marked a turning point for the worse. The progress halted, and we collectively entered a steady decline, which intensified when President Ramaphosa took office in 2017. Poor policy decisions, rampant corruption, and a focus on centralizing power have choked our once thriving economy. Unemployment has soared, the fiscal environment has deteriorated, and the social fabric of South Africa has been frayed. The ANC's grip on power has led to widespread despair and a vast erosion of freedoms. As we approach these crucial elections, millions of South Africans are trapped in the hopelessness and uncertainty of a broken economy. This is the tragic legacy of the ANC governance. Under the guise of delivering on Nelson Mandela's ANC vision of a better life for all, the government has overextended its reach, positioned itself in the wrong place in our economy, and grew into an authoritarian behemoth. Instead of enabling its citizens to escape poverty and joblessness, it has crushed the hopes of millions. The true crisis is evident in the desperate eyes of shoppers, the clenched fists of drivers overpaying for fuel, and the desolate homes where even basic necessities are unaffordable luxuries. Nerves are frayed, and spirits are worn thin. The daily struggle for survival, ignored by those in power, reveals a country in distress. I will now hand you over to Dr. Dion George to take over on the misery index.
Thank you very much, Bridget. Despite the ANC's hollow assurances of economic progress, every macroeconomic indicator signals financial deterioration, and battling South African households experience this firsthand every day. The ANC government easily obscures the true extent of economic hardship, given that measurements quantifying the lived experience of battling South Africans can be confusing. The misery index cuts through the confusion. It provides a clear and visual representation of the economic pain felt by millions. By measuring unemployment and inflation in conjunction with other indicators, it offers a tangible and easily understood gauge of the distress caused by the ANC government. The original misery index consisted of two components, the unemployment rate and the price inflation rate. These are the two great causes of real economic misery and financial distress. The original model only provided a limited scope of economic hardship. Additional components therefore had to be included to fully capture the distress of vulnerable South Africans. Our misery index includes 8 components. Unemployment. South Africa's unemployment crisis results directly from failed economic policies driven by the ANC-SACP-COSATU alliance. At 41.9%, the world's highest unemployment rate is dwarfed only by the highest youth unemployment rate in the world at 71%. While government officials will often scapegoat external shocks such as the global financial crisis and the COVID-19 pandemic as the culprits, the rest of the world, both emerging and developed, has rebounded from these disruptions. In 2024, while a record 12 million people are without work, the real number of unemployed individuals remains tragically similar to 2008, despite a near doubling of our population. Inflation. Inflation, measured as the Consumer Price Index, refers to the rate at which money loses buying power. Inflation is profoundly socially unjust tax on citizens, which, if left unrestrained, erodes the foundation of society. It decimates savings, disrupts markets, and sows seeds of social unrest. As trust in the purchasing power of our rand crumbles, so too will our social fabric. Despite the South African Reserve Bank's best efforts to contain upward spiraling living costs, top-down statist economic policies have over the years seen to it that South Africans have to battle the most profound cost of living crisis this country has ever seen. In 2007, a loaf of bread cost 5 rand. Today, South Africans pay over 17 rand for the same product. Other basic food items have seen even steeper increases. Why does the president ignore in his speeches that the prices of these basic necessities have more than tripled in the last 15 years? The DA is the only party that has presented a detailed and affordable plan to ease the burden on vulnerable households by removing VAT on essential food items. Our proposal has been repeatedly rejected by the Minister of Finance, although it was supported by the Standing Committee on Finance in Parliament. Gross domestic product per capita. GDP growth is a fundamental measure of our economy's health. It indicates the total value of all goods and services produced over a specific time period and reflects the economic activity within a country. Positive growth signifies an expanding economy. It is generally associated with increased employment, higher income levels, and improving living standards, and vice versa. Sustained economic growth is even more vital to prosperity in every country, and is essentially important to poor and vulnerable citizens. An economy that grows by 7% a year will double in size every 10 years, which indicates the profound shortfall of the ANC. Governments that allow markets to function and intervene little in their economies achieve much higher rates of growth than governments which do the opposite. On a granular level, GDP per capita provides a more nuanced view of economic well-being on an individual level. Our economy has been at a standstill for nearly a decade and a half. South Africans are becoming poorer by the day. South Africa's GDP per capita reached its peak in 2011. It has decreased markedly since. And while citizens of the developed world have grown wealthier, South Africans are on average much poorer today than they were in 2008. The repo rate. The prime lending rate is the benchmark for banks when setting loan rates, typically a few points above the central bank's repo rate. Changes in the repo rate thus directly impact the prime lending rate and influences the affordability of loans for consumers and businesses. An increase in the repo rate limits consumer spending and business growth. In line with most central bank practices, the South African Reserve Bank, the SARB, uses the repo rate adjustments as a primary tool to combat rising inflation. When inflation exceeds the target range, which is 3 to 6%, the SARB increases the repo rate, the interest rate at which it lends to commercial banks. This, in turn, raises the cost of borrowing for banks, which they pass on to consumers and businesses through higher interest rates on loans and credit. Increased borrowing costs discourage spending and investment, reducing demand for goods and services and thus easing inflationary pressure. By strategically adjusting the repo rate, the SARB aims to maintain price stability and promote sustained economic growth. In recent years, South Africa's prime lending rate has remained high, escalating credit costs and burdening households and businesses with greater interest expenses. This has led to reduced consumer spending, delayed business investments, and worsening financial distress nationwide. The DA government will not interfere with the independence of the Reserve Bank. We recognize its role in responding to inflation. Our economic policy in this regard is designed to, from a fiscal perspective, keep inflation at the lower end of the Reserve Bank's target range, reducing the need for rate increases. The rand depreciation against the dollar. Within the last 15 years, the ANC mismanagement of our economy and alliances with malign foreign actors such as Iran and Russia deteriorated investor sentiment to the extent that the rand lost up to 188% of its purchasing power against the US dollar. As a barometer of international confidence, movements in the rand's value reflect global sentiment on South Africa's economic stability and prospects. When the rand depreciates, it erodes purchasing power domestically. It also impacts the cost of servicing foreign-denominated debt, which becomes more expensive in rand terms. This further diminishes the state's ability to provide basic services. The sharp fall in the value of the rand underscores the ANC's failure to shield South Africa against global economic shocks, which left us particularly vulnerable to external shocks and disruptions in international trade. The inclusion of the rand depreciation against the dollar as a component of the misery index is necessary for capturing the unique vulnerabilities and dynamics of South Africa's economy in response to international economic conditions and deteriorating investor sentiment. On election, a DA-led government will engage with foreign investors to encourage them to reinvest the trillion rand that has been withdrawn from our economy over the past decade. Our message is clear. The investment environment will be very different. We will take decisive action to encourage entrepreneurs and make it far easier to open a business. We will reform current industrial and labour policies that get in the way of economic growth and employment. We will implement the DA's model for empowerment to ensure it actually reaches those in need, and we will move away from destructive policies that scare off investors, like the expropriation of private property. Debt to GDP ratio. South Africa's growing debt burden is escalating into a humanitarian disaster. The ANC government's irresponsible spending has ballooned South Africa's public debt tenfold within the span of just 15 years. South Africa's current national debt stands at 5.2 trillion rand. At present, our debt to GDP ratio stands at a dangerously high 74.1%. The cost of servicing this is already fast approaching 1 billion rand per day. Unbudgeted for expenditure items, like the NHI, will widen the current deficit, and a conservative estimate will see this ratio reach 80% by 2025, if not more. The continually rising ratio indicates that a growing share of the government's budget is consumed by interest payments, which constrains its capacity to deliver basic services and invest in critical areas that contribute to the well-being and safety of South Africans. The DA is the only party that has taken steps to address the crisis. We introduced a private members' bill that would have contained public debt and restricted irresponsible spending. It would have implemented firm measures to hold officials who mismanage public funds accountable. The ANC and EFF voted against the bill. The fuel tariff. Since 2008, fuel prices in South Africa have risen by 233%. The ANC government has not implemented any policies to address the crisis. Instead, it continues to enforce levies that compound the price pressures. As fuel prices increase, so do the cost of transportation and goods. The collapse of PRASA and Transnet has led to the decay of railway infrastructure to the point of being unusable, which forced an over-reliance on road transport for most goods, particularly food, adding additional pressure to the cost of living crisis. In the prevailing dispensation, South African consumers are being forced to pay more for fuel as the ANC government has become addicted to the extortionist tax revenue that it generates from fuel sales. The DEA has throughout the sixth administration called for a comprehensive review of the fuel price determination model, with particular emphasis on fuel taxes and levies to bring it in line with international best practice. The ANC government has spent the last 5 years evading the subject of unsustainable fuel taxes and levies, despite clear evidence these added surcharges on fuel were choking the economy and making life difficult for consumers. The cost of electricity. The electricity tariff affects the cost structure of the entire economy. It is a fundamental input for households and businesses alike. As electricity prices rise, the cost of living and operating businesses increases correspondingly. In the last 2 years, consumers saw their electricity bills increase by 31%, whilst also experiencing a corresponding increase in the number of hours they spend in the dark due to rolling blackouts. But since 2008, electricity prices have soared by an astounding 592%. This price increase by the ANC government is forcing South Africans to choose between buying electricity or putting food on the table. If these extortionist hikes persist, electricity will soon become a luxury many cannot afford. The DA is the only party that actively campaigned against the electricity price increases. Our fight culminated in a High Court case in which we argued that nurses' extortionate electricity price hike was a corruption tax to reward criminal syndicates operating with impunity at Eskom. The Eskom monopoly, with all its inefficiencies and corruption, has become an albatross around the necks of consumers and the economy. Instead of opening up the markets to the private sector and helping to lower electricity prices, the ANC government is dragging its feet on key and tangible reforms. When we put these components together, our misery index emerges. The chart next to me over there illustrates the components of the modified misery index for South Africa from 2008 to 2024. Each bar represents the sum of these factors for a given year, showing how they combine to impact the overall economic hardship faced by South Africans. The red line, representing the total misery index, clearly shows a catastrophic intensification of financial distress over the years. The misery index is proof that the ANC is no longer fit to govern. Its leaders have failed this country. They have failed South Africans, and they must be voted out next week. I will now hand over to my colleague, Ashor Sarupen.
Thank you, Dion. Unfortunately, I lack the height of my colleagues, but I make up for it in, hopefully, presentation. The simple reality is that when you look at the misery index, you can conclude very quickly that for the entirety of our democratic history, we've never had citizens, households, and businesses experience such high levels of distress. The costs of food, the costs of fuel, and electricity has soared. Lending rates are extremely high, and price inflation is taking its toll on most South Africans. Factories are battling to maintain productive capacity because rolling blackouts have grinded all of their production lines to a halt. No modern economy can grow in this environment. But we've reached a point where we conclude that the current administration, led by the ANC, has simply given up. They do not care. And it does not have to be this way. The Democratic Alliance has tabled both a manifesto and a new economic policy to turn this around. We're the only party that has a comprehensive plan to attract the necessary direct foreign investments, to encourage domestic savings, and to change the model for state-owned enterprises, to fix our crumbling infrastructure, to make sure that we get more people into work, to fight corruption, to facilitate the expansion of small and large business sectors as well. This is why a DA-led government will adopt efficient and targeted growth-focused reforms that put the well-being of South African citizens, households, and firms first. To rescue South Africa, we must remove this broken government and elect a party that can unlock the potential of South Africa. Otherwise, we'll continue to spiral further into poverty and instability. Every promise of progress has been squandered. The DA has delivered alternative budgets, we've tabled private members' bills, and we've launched a new economic policy. But heading into the next election week, a DA-led government is committed to the following. Firstly, we will create 2 million new jobs over 5 years through our various targeted interventions in our manifesto. We will end load shedding and increasingly water shedding, and I'm sure those of you in Johannesburg are dealing with this week again. We'll halve the rate of violent crime, including murder, attempted murder, and gender-based violence. We will abolish cadre deployment in favor of merit-based appointments and a capable state that delivers for all citizens. Our interventions will lift 6 million people out of poverty. We will triple the number of grade 4 learners who can read for meaning, and we will ensure quality healthcare for all through meaningful reforms, not a broken NHI, and this quality healthcare will deliver regardless of economic status. If we can achieve these things, we can stop the misery index from falling even further and rescue all South Africans from the suffocating grip that the ANC has led us to up to now. Thank you very, very much. We will now take questions. Yes.
Thank you very much. Thank you. My first question is just, in your opinion, what are the most urgent of these 8 indicators to actually address? And what are the likelihoods of you managing to address that one first?
I think the most pressing problem in South Africa very clearly is unemployment. You solve unemployment, you begin to solve a whole lot of other problems. But as you look at the misery index, unemployment is a consequence of some of these factors. Load shedding being a prime example. When you decimate productive capacity, because factories cannot work for 2 or 3 hours a day, businesses cannot operate, then you create a situation where you have declining productivity and make your country less attractive for investment, and you create a worse business environment. You also drive up inflation, which is another factor on the misery index. So to solve unemployment, you need to solve some of these critical things, load shedding and water shedding first and foremost. And you get that right. I was looking at some key data not too long ago. If South Africa's economy were to grow at more than 2% per annum right now, we would have a national energy blackout because there simply isn't enough electricity to fuel that kind of growth. And so you've got to solve the load shedding crisis, the water shedding crisis, the crisis of infrastructure, particularly at municipal level. Those are the building blocks. But that doesn't mean that you are not going to get away with it by keeping very restrictive labor legislation in place, amongst other factors. But those are the pressing, urgent first priorities. The second part of the question was, how quickly can they be solved? I think we've seen that it took the state a tremendous amount of time just to change a handful of regulations to allow municipalities to procure from IPPs. But once that was lifted, where the DA governs, and only where the DA governs, we saw municipalities move with haste to get IPPs on stream. The city of Cape Town, Stellenbosch, Mossel Bay, even in Ekurhuleni, where we were only in government for a year and a minority coalition in a very unstable situation, we signed a whole lot of IPP projects. In fact, Ekurhuleni will probably be the first ones on stream. But it just took a little bit of red tape to be lifted. So with the right reforms, these things can be solved pretty quickly, and with a reduced hostility towards the private sector, you can get the necessary investment to solve these problems. I think my colleague Dion wants to add something to this, so let Dion come in.
Yes, I'd just like to add briefly to what Ashor said about the immediate things that can be done. The one immediate thing you can do very, very quickly is you can cut the tax on fuel. And what that would do is would immediately have an impact on inflation. And then, as Ashor said, how the rest of the things would all then fall into place. So it is possible for a DA government to immediately cut that administered tax. And that would then spill over to all of the other indicators in the misery index. So thank you very much.
Okay, next question, please. No, you go ahead.
Thank you very much. I actually want to just build on that comment of the petrol price and please get both of your inputs if possible, or all three if that's okay. What are the costs in your mind, or in your opinion, of cutting the fuel taxes? I mean, there's always a trade-off. And how will you address that? I mean, obviously, I can only think of a few things, like maybe it'll affect grants, maybe it'll affect some support mechanisms. What are those costs if you had to identify some?
So I think there's an assumption that this is a zero-sum game. And it's seen in isolation on the package of reforms. So reducing the fuel price, the fuel levies, and let me give you one example. In 2009, Praveen Gordhan announced an additional amount of the fuel levy, for example, when he was finance minister, to build a pipeline from Durban to Johannesburg to pump fuel across. And of course, refinery capacity has completely collapsed in all that time, but that amount stayed in place as part of the fuel price. There's 2 rand something that he added to the fuel price in that year. I can't remember the exact figure. But when you consider that and you look at holistically what has happened to the fuel price with every year these little bits being added on to fund other parts of the fiscus, you just find a fuel price that is not reflective of the costs of getting fuel into the country and then the distribution and the small profit margins for retailers, but rather a cash cow for the state, which is it's effectively a stealth tax on road users. You look at the Road Accident Fund levy, which has been terribly mismanaged, and the entire model of the Road Accident Fund needs to change. We put alternatives on that. There's lots of scope in a revenue neutral manner to drastically reduce the fuel price. But why it's important to reduce the fuel price is because it drives inflation. With the collapse of Transnet and the ability to move goods around using rail, we are very dependent on imported fuel and trucks to move things around. So you might say, okay, well, it'll require government cuts here and there. That may be true, but when you look at the reduction in inflation, if you're very poor and you're living on a grant, if bread doesn't go up from 15 Rand to 17 Rand next month, that is a very, very big consequential impact. And so you've got to look at this holistically. Now, where are trade-offs? We know, for example, that the state, despite being instructed by the Auditor General to cut back on expenditure on consultants, continues to accelerate expenditure on consultants. There is a lot of scope within the state to make the necessary cuts. There's no political will. When I was a member of the Gauteng legislature in 2015, I remember the MEC for Sports, Arts, Culture and Recreation said to me that her department is the Department of Events and nothing else. Now, if you've got that kind of political direction going into a government department, I would argue that a lot of government events are massively wasteful, and it would make more sense to redirect that to protect grants, to protect welfare, to invest in infrastructure, to invest in sports development. And so we've got a massively bloated state, and so there's lots of opportunity. Even on promises made by former Finance Minister Trevor Manuel on zero-based budgeting that never came to be, there are a tremendous amount of duplication in the state. I'll give you one other example of this before I hand over to Dion to add in. And that is, when it comes to assisting with municipal finance and budgeting, National Treasury runs a project, the National Cogta Department runs a project, Provincial Treasury runs a project, Provincial Cogta Departments run projects. You've got 4 departments trying to just help municipalities budget with their officials, tripping over each other, rushing to failing municipalities. All very clever, very skilled people, but it's a massive duplication of costs. And these are the things that have crept into the state over the years. So does cutting the fuel price mean that the state will be starved of revenue? Not if the state makes itself lean and efficient. Thanks.
Yes, thanks very much. That's a very comprehensive answer. There's nothing really to add other than to say and to mind you that every year we do an alternative budget. We also do an alternative medium-term budget policy statement, and that is fully costed. And what we've done over time is we've said, well, if government just changed the way that it actually structured its spending, for example, if you look at, for example, preferential procurement, the massive amount of money that's wasted on that, if you just look there, you would have an enormous amount of money. So yes, it is very much possible to actually cut back the fuel levy and eventually scrap it if you really want to, without hurting any of the services, because it's the way that government sees itself in the economy. And that's the big problem. So what is possible? And there's no such thing as a silver bullet. We know this. But what there are things that you can do immediately. So for example, should a DA government come into government after next week, the immediate things that you can do is improve sentiment. So immediately you go across the world and you tell everybody we are going to be doing business differently. And these are the policy changes we're going to make. That immediately lifts sentiment and it costs you nothing. Other things that cost you nothing, for example, is if you fight corruption properly. All you have to do is to find a few people, and there are quite a number out there, catch them, put them into prison, because people respond to incentive. That's financial behavior. And those are the immediate things that are possible to be done. So as Ashor says, is that it's not a zero-sum game. Our economy is capable of growing. We are capable of rescuing it. We just need to get the mandate to do that. Thanks.
Thanks. We got online questions, Lisa.
Thank you, panel. So, Mr. Tando Mayeko from Business Day has sent through 2 questions. He's following this briefing online. The first question is, the ANC is expected to go below 50% in this year's election, placing it in a position where it will be forced to form coalitions. What is the DA's take on estimations by financial market watchers that an ANC-DA coalition would be the best for the country?
Okay, let me answer that firstly and simply. Quite clearly, financial markets like the DA policies. That's for the first clear take, that our economic policy was fairly well received by most outlets. And clearly, the DA policies are seen as a way forward. And that is in short, yes. But I want to say this very clearly. The Democratic Alliance is not in this election fighting to come in second place. We have a multi-party charter. There's a week to go. We're going to have an election where turnout is unpredictable. And if every opposition voter pitches up 2 votes, with the multi-party charters larger than the ANC, there's a very different conversation to be had. So I think that it's premature, considering that there's so many variables in this election, to presume that a coalition configuration right now means that the ANC will be speaking from a position of strength. Simple as that.
Thank you, Ash. Second question, maybe this is for Dion. The DA declared the highest amount of political party funding in the fourth quarter of 2023. Do you think this is a vote of confidence in the party from its donors, which are mostly in the private sector? Please explain your answer. Thank you.
Yes, I think in a nutshell, when people want to give a political party money, it means that they would want them to be in government. And that is what exactly happens. So what I like to say is that donor behavior is almost like a canary in the cage. So that when donors want to invest in your party, it means that they have confidence in it. Now, the complexity of the Political Party Funding Act as it was is that there sometimes is an assumption or some view that money and politics is somehow a bad combination. The fact of the matter is, if you want a democracy in South Africa, it costs money, and money comes from donations also. So it is heartening to see that we have many, many South Africans, some can give little, some can give a lot, who are investing in political parties because they want to invest in our democracy. And yes, it is so that the DA has done very well in terms of donations. We have stuck very rigidly to the rules, unlike other parties, but we have, and that has made fundraising more difficult, but we have done very, very well. And the reason for that is because people want the DA to rescue South Africa, and we're going to do just that. Thanks.
Okay. Last one, I promise.
All right.
I just have a question around remarks made by the former Minister of Finance, Tito Mboweni. A few years ago, during his budget speech, he emphasized the fact that government spending or expenditure had effectively started having a less than one-on-one effect on gross capital formation. And therefore, every rand spent by the state was actually decreasing the size of the economy. What do you think are the main things that you would have to change to turn that around?
Yes. So the multiplier effect in economics that he was referring to is generally the estimation that every cent spent in public goods and services has a knock-on effect in the economy that means that you generate net value as a result of that. So, for example, if you build a bridge that gets people to work more quickly, the gains in productivity as a consequence of that means that you have a bigger economy, consequentially. And that is an example. The reason why the multiplier effect in South Africa became net negative is largely because of corruption and inefficient fiscal allocations by the various government departments. And I used the example earlier of the duplications in the state. But a lot of it is driven by corruption, particularly in infrastructure projects, delayed infrastructure projects that run over time. A very good example of this is Medupi and Kusile. So they ran massively over budgets, and they still don't produce the necessary energy output to resolve load shedding. And in a country and an economy that needs to decarbonize, it was an inefficient choice now that we are in the world we are in 2024. And that's a prime example of how you create a net negative multiplier effect by state spending. If you also look at some of the projects the state has chosen. In 2010, during the World Cup, the state decided they were going to spend money on what they called the 2010 legacy projects, particularly in townships and informal settlements, building soccer stadiums and so on. And what you saw was that they just cleared up a field, huge amounts of money to build stadiums and facilities, but rather cleared up a field, cut some grass, demarcated it for a soccer game for the locals to use, but never built a facility, and all that money was siphoned off. And where they even did build facilities, there was no maintenance budget, and maintenance is the other part of why we have a net negative multiplier, and I'm using this as just as an example. But the failure to maintain means that it doesn't become an asset in the long run. It just becomes overrun with grass and disappears. And you see this replicated all across the country. And so the lack of maintenance is the second key thing that drives the negative multiplier effect that Tito Mbweni was speaking about. I hope that answers your question. Anything else? No. Okay, any further questions? Well, thank you very much then for your attendance and your time and your attention. I trust you will report both on the misery index as well as on our solutions, which are very positive and will get South Africa out of this quagmire. Thank you very much.
South Africa has the potential to be a great nation. But it breaks my heart hearing from so many people who are struggling to feed their families. People are tired of corruption, tired of load shedding, tired of empty promises. But it doesn't have to be this way. The Democratic Alliance is on a mission to rescue South Africa. Where the DA already governs, life is better. And that is why millions of people are moving to DA governments. Every day, we are working harder to do more. For the first time in 30 years, united as the multi-party charter for South Africa, we have a real chance to bring in a new national government that works. A strong Democratic Alliance will anchor a new government that can rescue South Africa. But we need every single South African to unite and join the rescue mission.
A strong DA can rescue South Africa. Vote DA.